This is Kathy Haley on January 13th at 11 a.m. in Washington, D.C. And I'm talking with David Scheuerman, who is in Grand Junction, Colorado. First of all, Dave, let me thank you for agreeing to be recorded for the oral history collection of the Washington Museum and Cultural Center in Worland, Wyoming. We have two goals. First, that our class of 1960 tells what life was like for kids and teenagers in Worland from about 1941 to 1960. The second goal is that we share how growing up in Worland impacted our adult lives. So, what is your full name? And was there a nickname you were known by during your Worland days?
David Lloyd Scheuerman, and just Dave.
Okay. Were you born in Worland?
Yes.
What brought your family to Worland?
A
Was
better
it just
life.
your parents? Was it just your parents?
Oh, yes, my parents, yes. Yeah,
And your
a better life.
grandparents?
The grandparents are the ones that came. They came from Russia. They moved to Wisconsin first. I think I forget what the valley was called, and then they moved to Colorado, and then eventually to Wyoming and Worland.
Why did they leave Colorado and Wisconsin? How did they end up in Worland? Why Worland?
That's a good question. I can't answer that. I know they're farmers, and they were looking for farming country. And that's why they settled in Wisconsin, my understanding. And I forget the name of the valley, but why they ended up, coming to Wyoming, I couldn't tell you that. I never asked.
Were they sugar beet farmers in Russia?
No. Wheat, gardens, berries. No, there was wheat and rye, and I think there was one other crop that they grew. But sugar beets has been the main crop in Wyoming for years because of the factory, of course.
So which grandparents? Your father's parents or your mother's parents? All of them?
Both, but my father's parents are the ones that were the farmers. My mother's parents, he was a blacksmith in Worland. That's on my mother's side, the Schneider side. Now, there were a lot of Schneiders that were farmers in Worland, but my grandfather on my mother's side was a blacksmith.
Were they from the same town in Russia? Had they known each other before?
Yes. Well, that I don't know. I have to figure that they did, because they came over. When they went to Russia, the Shermans were on the west side of the Volga River. The Schneiders were on the east side, but they were very close. It was like a colony of Germans that were settled in Russia. Now, they did not come to the United States at the same time. It was about 5 years in between the times. The Shermans came first, and then the Schneiders. Now, whether the Schneiders followed coming into the United States to go into Wisconsin and then Colorado and Wyoming, I can't tell you, but it's the Shermans that did that route and ended up in Wyoming in the Worland area.
Okay, just a second. Do you know anything about the history of when they left Germany and went to the Volga area? Did your grandparents ever talk about any of the stories that they'd come with?
Never talked about it at all. The little bit of reading I've tried to do to understand that, it's, this is right at the end of the 7-Year War. And they were just
7-Year War between who?
In Europe. This is in Europe, the 7-Year War. I think, it just went on, and there was a lot of fires. And so they were desperate. They were poor. And Catherine the Great, Catherine II, I believe, in Russia, was inviting the Russians or the Germans to come in for a better life. And so they did. The first manifesto, it wasn't very successful. There was a second manifesto that she came for, and they gave them money to and supplies and food to on their trip to come into Russia to settle there. And of course, they're farmers, and that's what they did. They grew the wheat that we're talking about. They had big gardens, which the history of that continues in Wyoming. When they moved to Wyoming, the same things as what we did on the farm. See, I lived in the farm 8 miles north of town of Worland, on a farm, 300 acres. And so the history of what they did there, the hard work, that came with my parents, and the history of that and the result of that has had a great effect on the rest of my life. And we can, talk about that at the proper time. But I can't tell you why they came to Wyoming. I think it was just better farming country. I can't answer that.
When did they come? Do you know the years?
Yeah.
Maybe it was right after the canals opened up lots of land.
Well, I think that's true. And I do have got the dates here. Let's see. They came to the United States May 22nd, 1902. They first came to Wisconsin, living there until 1911 when they moved to Colorado. And then in 1917, they moved to Wyoming. They farmed in the Niebuhr, Basin, Kane, and the Worland areas. And they had 15 kids in my parents' family, my dad's family, 15 kids, 4 of which died when they were young.
Mm-hmm.
So 11 made it to adulthood.
I can't remember Joni Culbertson's great aunt, Mary Culbertson, and Helen Coburn then came out from Iowa when they opened up with the canals, and they homesteaded. But I think that was in the 10s. Do you remember, Peggy?
I don't.
I don't either. So, but my dad homesteaded. Maybe he and Fred Schneider homesteaded maybe when I was in high school. So they were still homesteading then occasionally. So your grandparents could have taken out homesteads.
That very well could be, yeah. I know my dad farmed for an individual who owned the farm for quite a few years until that fella, was getting older, and he decided to sell it to my dad. And of course, he bought it just real quick, 300 acres, 8 miles north of town on the west side of the Bighorn.
So my dad said when he was in school, he would have been contemporary with your parents, probably.
Sure. Yeah.
Because he and Rick Hake's dad and Grant Ujafus's dad all graduated from high school together. Dad said a lot of the German kids had to quit school after 8th grade because their parents said, we need you to work on the farm. Did that happen to your parents?
It certainly did. It happened to my dad. He had a little spot on his lung. And about that time, his twin brother, my Uncle John, went to the service. He was in the Army. My dad only went.
Wait, after 8th grade?
Well, no, not after 8th grade. My dad didn't go beyond the 8th grade.
Okay. For the same reason that my dad.
He stayed on the farm. My Uncle John, he did go to high school and graduated with a degree from high school. But my dad did not. He only went through the 8th grade. You're right about they needed him on the farm. So they made that decision that my Uncle John then would finish school, and my dad, stayed on the farm.
They
But-
being your grandparents,
I'm sorry? Yeah,
they being your grandparents.
yes, yeah.
Wow. How about for your mother?
No, she did finish high school. She sure did as a Schneider. They lived south of Worland, and my parents, the Shermans lived north, the Niebuhr, Kane area, and but the Schneiders were south of Worland. That would be my mother and her family. Yeah.
I was thinking Niebuhr was south, so
No, it's north.
you're helping make my geography more accurate. Do you remember, did you have an impact from World War II? You must have been conceived right after Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, the only thing I remember was my Uncle Johnny coming back. It didn't change anything on the farm. Supplies were difficult, but one of the things, and I'm sure this was true in Russia about the Shermans and the Germans, I guess, you didn't throw anything away. And they just made do. Now, my parents never talked about the Depression, what it meant to them going through that Depression. Of course, now we're talking about World War II, excuse me. But I don't remember anything specific that was different during World War II. I know supplies were, difficult, a lot of things, but the Germans and us on the farm, we had big gardens. We had sweet corn. I mean, we had potatoes. We had a root cellar. I mean, we grew all that stuff and canned things. I mean, I can't remember. I don't remember the number of times that I have, what do you call peas? Taking peas out of the shells. And dug potatoes. And then, of course, they were in the root cellar, and Mom would say, hey, Dave, go get 4 spuds. So I'd have to go down and open up the big, heavy door into the root cellar and go into the sacks and grab some potatoes. Oh, that's what you do on the farm like that, is you grow a lot of that stuff and make do with it.
Did your grandparents, so they got here while World War I was still going on. Did you ever have any prejudice, or did they ever talk about any prejudice? Because my mother's cousin married a woman who was a German-American family from Ohio, and they changed her name from Marta to Margaret. When the war started, when the US went into the war, she said they took all of the German books. Her father had them take them out and put them in the front yard and burned them. And he said, we're Americans and we will not speak German anymore.
Wow.
Did you ever hear any stories like that from your parents or your grandparents?
No, but they didn't talk any German. Now, when they got together, and our families did, my Uncle Leo, my Uncle John, we'd always, a lot of Sundays, go have dinner with one of the brothers and their family. Once in a while, they'd talk German. It was, and it was a joke or something like that, and they'd go back and they'd remember something that happened and they would talk German. But never did they attempt to teach us how to speak German. That was not in their DNA. I mean, they just didn't want to do it. Now, I have to tell you, on Christmas Eve, we always had a Christmas program at the Zion Lutheran Church in Worland, at a Christmas program. We'd all get out to the car, and that's me and my 4 brothers. I'm the oldest of 5. And all of a sudden, there was this guttural language going on between my mom and my dad. And it was very guttural. It was German. And all of a sudden, Dad would get out of the car and go back into the house, and he would be in there for about 5 or 10 minutes while we were warming up in the car. Lo and behold, he came back out. We went to the program. And when we got home after the program, Santa Claus had been to the house. So Mom was telling Dad, the gifts are blah, blah, blah in German. And of course, I couldn't understand any of that. But, you know, it took me a few years before I finally understood what they were talking about and the reason that Dad went back into the house. It's just,
When we got German in high school,
yeah,
did you take German from Mrs.
I
Fansley?
sure did. I did not know. English and English to me in high school was for the ladies. I have to tell you, I'm more of a hardworking guy like my dad, and English and the language, it just never appealed to me. And so I never had any desire. Now my daughter took German in high school, the one that lives here. Yeah, she can speak it pretty well. So, but I never had a desire. I was more interested in math and sports and, typical guy, I guess. I don't know.
So when you think about your neighborhood, your home and your neighborhood out there on the farm, what are some sights and sounds and memories that you have?
Okay. Oh my goodness. Tractors, mooing cows, baying sheep. Early in the morning, going to the beet factory and getting a load of the beet pulp, which was steamy, and taking it back out and then running it into the feed troughs of either the cows or the sheep. I did that before I went to school.
You didn't mention the smell of the steaming beet.
Oh,
pulp.
yes. Oh, my goodness, certainly. But I want to tell you, the livestock absolutely loved it. And it was just those times of the year, when the beets were being processed at the factory, that was available. Otherwise, we were busting hay in the wintertime to be fed to the stock. A big hay buster out there with our coveralls on, wind howling in typical Wyoming country.
What does that mean? What does that mean to bust hay?
Okay, you cut hay and stack it, and it's long and it's loose. We busted it up into small pieces, make it a little easier to feed the stock in a feed trough. We had it in the trucks, and we just went by. We had a truck that had a conveyor system inside, which would move to the back and knock that the hay, the busted hay out into the feed troughs. So
How would you get the hay out of the stack? Were you using pitchforks, or was there some sort of attachment?
It was a tractor. It was a tractor with a lift on it, and you just drive into the stack, pick up a lift, come over, and then dump that into the hay buster. And of course, we were helping to feed the hay into the hay buster. We were standing up on platforms, being able to, as the hay was brought over, we could continue to put it into the hay buster, make sure it went into and got broken up. And this is in the wintertime, of course, but in the summertime, I have to tell you, and today, I suppose it would be child abuse, and my father would be put in prison, I suppose. My dad put wired blocks of wood on the tractors, on the clutches and the brakes, so we could reach them. Because we were young. We didn't have our legs were not long enough to reach those. So he just solved that problem. And so we drove tractors all the time.
How old were you when you first started driving a tractor?
I think just right around high school time, probably junior high, because in junior high in the 8th grade, I remember I played basketball only one year. It was too difficult to keep coming back and forth from the farm because we just had way too many chores to do. And so I just gave it up after that. I did very well. I remember the coach, we played tent sleep one time and I scored a bunch of points, but we got on the bus and I was just howling about that. And boy, the coach came over and said, well, how many points did the guy you were guarding score? So that set me down. But anyway, we're talking about the farm. You were talking about sights and sounds. I guess my whole elementary, junior high, and even high school, it revolved around the farm because of all the chores and the work that we had to do. I wasn't involved in town. You know, all my friends were in town. I remember Chester Pierce coming out on a weekend, and he was just absolutely amazed at the pickups and the trucks. And driving to us was just something, it was normal. It's just something you had to do. It wasn't a big deal. Like some of the guys, you know, dragging Maine, I've dragged Maine a few times, but to me it was, what's the reason here? I mean, for dragging Maine, we're wasting gas, you know, but I did a couple of times. So the farm was big for me, the farm and church. Church was a big part of our life. And I think the experience I had on the farm really set me up for my life's work because of the hard work. You know, it's not 8 to 5. Most jobs are, you know, if you work in town at a store or what have you. But farming is this, you do whatever it takes to get the job done. And so we had chores. We had milk cows and hogs. And the milk cows, and I don't know how many times I've squirted over to cats when I'm milking the cows. They'd always come around. But then we had a separator and we separated the cream from the milk. And my mom would make cream puffs like you wouldn't believe. Now, I have blamed my mother for my sweet tooth. She said, no, you need to blame your dad for your sweet tooth. He's the one that wanted all of the German pastries, which, by the way, I have to admit, in the book, there's a chapter that talks about German pastries and the recipes and how to work the stuff. Well, it's typical of what I grew up with. So you see the food and how they prepared it came with them, not only from Germany to Russia to the United States. And it was just amazed me in this book when I found those recipes and the words, hey, that's what I grew up with. You know, we were skin and bones and eating that heavy, you know, and it never made any difference. So back to the farm. And the reason I say the church was important and what really made an impression on me, my dad and I were out, well, a couple of things. I have been out after supper to move a set. In other words, we had a set of watering beets with siphon tubes, plastic tubes. And you'd have to pick up 50 of those and move them to the next section. And then, of course, let the water flow and put a dam in, dam up the water, and then set the tubes. Well, when you picked up 50 tubes or whatever you could at like 6 o'clock in the evening, mosquitoes, you picked up all those tubes, you had to hang on to the tubes and the mosquitoes were just eating me alive. I remember that specifically. And then you'd move to the next area that was dry, the rows of beets, lay out those tubes and then come back and set them all. The plastic tubes went to aluminum. Aluminum tubes went to gated pipe. Now, gated pipe actually came after, I graduated from high school, but all the time that I was on the farm working, it was with tubes. It's changed drastically today. I mean, I've still got Scheuermans that are farming in Worland, but it has changed completely. There's no tubes involved anymore. It's all sprinkler systems, which you can do on your iPhone.
Pivot.
Start number 1, start number 8. And if you have a problem with one of the sprinkler systems, the system tells you. I mean, it's just, it's still a lot of work. There's no doubt about it, but it's still farming. But so
Wait,
what
I
I
have
learned-
I have a question. Did they have
Sure.
did they have mosquito dope to keep the mosquitoes away?
Oh, yeah, yeah, and we tried to use that. Oh, yeah, we did. Yeah, for sure. But it's, they just swarm you. You got to have it on your hands and everywhere. So that experience, having chores and milking cows is 7-day, 24/7. And when you're at a cousin's house after church having lunch, and you're playing with your cousins, and then all of a sudden, all right, boys, we got to go home. It's time to milk the cows. So what did that do for me? Living and having chores to do on the farm. It gave me things to do. I didn't have time to get in trouble, and so it's a work ethic that you learn, and it stays with you. It's really helped me in my professional life as when I went into construction, and we can get to that later. I mean, by the time it made a difference because it was never an 8 to 5 for me. So what does it take to get the job done? And that's what you do on the farm. The other thing was, of course, religion. And I have to say, my dad one time, just before it's harvest time, to harvest grain, and we always had grain. That's the time of the year when it's hot temperatures in Worland that you get those storms coming through and you get hail. And we'd be out, setting a set, and I'd hear my dad say, Lord, let this storm pass. I mean, that makes an impression on you. It's not like going to a church and sitting in a pew and listening to somebody. This is a real life attention to God when you're out on the farm and you're asking him for, please let the storm pass, because if you get hail on that grain, you've lost it. I mean, it just shreds everything and there's nothing left. So I remember that specifically, my dad saying, let the storm pass. But his hard work, going to church on Sunday morning. Now this was, Dad was in a suit and it's nice, had a tie on and his dress shoes. And we'd be coming back, be driving by a set that we had made that morning. And some of the water wasn't going in the direction that he wanted it to go. Oh, he stopped that car. He jumped right out of that car, jumped across the irrigation ditch, and with a stick or his hands, made that water go where he wanted to go. And then he jumped back across the ditch, get in the car, and then we went to church. So he's a hard worker with an 8th grade education. I've never seen anybody more mechanically inclined than my dad. I mean, he could weld, he could use the torches, and he got that, I think, from my mother's dad, who was a blacksmith. And so, we had a shop and we had a hearth, where you could heat things up, and had a big anvil and make it the size that you wanted, whatever the pieces were. I remember him always talking about those engineers don't know how to make stuff. It never was strong enough as far as he was concerned. They don't understand. I used to laugh. And of course, I became an engineer, civil. But those are the things with an 8th grade education. When it came to fixing things, he just had a knack for it. And of course, the hard work. He told me one time, electricity, I don't understand electricity. Well, I said, Dad, I don't either. So you don't have to worry about it as long as it works. So anyway, we're talking about my growing up on the farm during particularly, high school days. And then with the youth group, I've got to tell you what happened in the youth group at the church. We got a baseball team, put a baseball team together. And my brother and I, Jakey Ellen, who's dead now, we like to play baseball. And so we got a team up and we started playing. We went to 10 Sleep and played a team. And I was a pitcher. And the Junior Legion heard about us and saw us play and wanted us to play baseball. And of course, in Worland, in Wyoming, you really don't have weather for baseball. So it's sponsored by the Junior Legion in the summertime. And so we started playing with the Junior Legion. And make, I guess, a long story short, we played Sheridan in Worland in the state championship series. And I pitched, and I think the final score was 4-3 in favor of Sheridan, but they were the state champions from the year before. Well, I made all state because of that one pitching performance. My dad loved baseball, and I've been talking about the farm and all the chores, and this is in the summertime. And when the Junior Legion asked us to play, I was totally shocked when my dad allowed us, myself and Jakey Allen, to play baseball in the summertime. I knew that the hired men, they were going to have to pick up a lot of slack because, you know, we were always busy. Well, my dad loved baseball, and that's the reason he let us play. And then from that, the next story is I got a scholarship to Arizona State. And I wish I could remember the American Legion guys. One of them was an accountant in Worland. He was part of the Junior Legion, and he was an alum from Arizona State. He's the one that got me the scholarship to Arizona State. And here I am, you know, graduating in 1960, and in September, flying down to Phoenix. On the plane in Denver, I got on and sat beside a young man who was a senior in high school. Turns out his mother worked at Arizona State. This was on a Sunday, September the 4th. The next day was September 5th, my birthday, Labor Day. Arizona State, the campus was closed. I told him what I was headed. They said, well, they're closed tomorrow. They invited me. I spent the 2 nights with them. She took me down to Arizona State. And the reason I say that, I mean, I was like a fish out of water. I mean, I'm going down to Arizona State to play baseball. And then they told me I had to take some classes. Now that sounds juvenile, but that's just how young I was. I mean, I didn't turn 18 until September 5th, Labor Day in Arizona State. It was down in Phoenix. See, what was it? What was the name of the place? I can't remember now. But anyway, they took me then the following day on the 6th down to the campus, and I met Bobby Winkles, who was the coach. And the other thing that happened when I went, now we're off of high school now, and I guess I've gone on to college, but I guess we've got to come back to high school a little bit. I don't know what else to say about it, because my whole experience during high school was basically wrapped around the farm and my youth group. You know, I didn't have, Chester Pierce was one of my good friends. Lo Peterson was one of my good friends because we went to church together. But being involved in Worland and the people in Worland, just, you know, we had to get back on the farm because I had work there. And
Did you do 4-H? Was that part
No,
of?
I started that, but didn't finish. Now I was in ag in the school. You know, I was in ag, and in fact, through that, I drove school bus when I was a junior and senior in high school. I don't know if you remember that the high school kids drove school bus, and because we're, you know, from the farm, driving wasn't any big deal. So I drove as a junior and senior, drove school bus. I look back on that now and I think, my goodness, I mean, there's no way they can allow that to happen today. You know, it's completely different. But anyway, that's part of the experience of growing up the farm. The things that you learn, the hard work, the spiritual aspect of it.
There were lots of Lutheran churches in Worland. There was more than one. I don't know lots, but there was more than one.
Yeah.
How many were there in those days, and why were you in Zion? What was it about Zion?
Well, the only thing I can say is that all the Germans went to the Zion Lutheran, and I wish I could remember the street that it was on. They're on Main Street. But all of the ranchers, the farmers, the Schneiders and the Shermans went to this church. All the farmers. Now, I can't say all of them, but the bulk of them, of course, went to the Zion Lutheran Church. We had a picnic.
Still do,
What's that?
and still do.
Yeah, they still do. That's
where
exactly
I
right.
go.
Yeah. We always had a picnic every summer down in Thermopolis at the big park there. Everybody brought, fried chicken, you name it. And that's one of the big things that we as a church did. Every summer, we go down and have that big picnic. And of course, the youth group, which I've already mentioned to you, the youth group, we played baseball, but we did a lot of other things through that youth group. We had hay rides, Easter Sunday, Easter Sunrise Sunday. We always went someplace on the Bighorn for an Easter sunrise service. But farming is, and I just never, I guess I never had the urge to stay on the farm. I wanted to, I guess I was interested in engineering. And of course, the baseball is the thing that really put me into college. It wasn't because I wanted to study engineering. It was to play baseball. And I got to continue with the story about going down to Arizona State.
Okay,
Because, yeah, go ahead.
no,
And
go
I don't know
ahead.
if it's time. Okay. We get down to Arizona State and I end up on campus, of course, and meet the baseball coach. Takes me over to the big athletic building where we had our rooms. And then I had to go sign up for classes. And it's like, oh, what? I gotta go to school. I had to take 12 hours was the minimum, of course. Well, Arizona State is a land grant college. What that means is, and Wyoming is too, University of Wyoming, you have to provide military training. And at Arizona State, it was either the Army or Air Force. They said, you have to sign up for ROTC, Reserve Officer Training Corps. I said, oh, really? Well, I said, it's either the Army or the Air Force. Well, I knew Army is green. Their uniforms are green, and the Air Force, the uniforms are blue. Blue is my favorite color. I said, sign me up for the Air Force because I like blue better than green. Now, I spent 5 years in the Air Force. Because of that decision, because I like blue better than green, I had to take ROTC. I got hurt playing baseball that first year at Arizona State. One of my roommates from Guttenberg, Iowa, a left-handed power hitter during batting practice, and I always fielded my position. I always was good, but when this kid hit that ball and it went off my elbow, that swelled up. I didn't think I'd ever pitch again. So I didn't get my scholarship back, so I had to go to University of Wyoming. That was my in-state school. Well, land grant college, so I continued with the ROTC. The second year was required. During that second year, I got interested in the advanced ROTC to become an officer in the Air Force. Like I say, 2 weeks later, I was working for TVA as a civil engineer. Now, I can tell you what an experience it was. I just had spent 5 years in the Air Force, always on the go. If you're not sitting alert, you're flying training missions. And those training missions were to take that B-52 to Russia. I mean, that was the Cold War. The only way you could get into Russia with a B-52, as large as it is to go low level. So our training missions were low level training missions all over the United States. There are areas where you can go down to 500 feet above the ground. And we did that and use radar. One of the pilots covered up his windshield and had to fly on instruments. and keep that airplane 500 feet above the ground. You put on your radar to go out and get blips 3 miles out in front of you, 5 miles. And so if there's a mountain peak coming, if you're low level, it tells you you've got something out in front of you. So now you got to fly to go over that mountaintop. Low level is the only way we would have gotten into Russia to bomb the targets. So when we went on alert, first thing we did, we went over and got our top secret briefings. This is the target. This is the area. I finally, after about 2 or 3 years, I think I finally asked, what is the planned rate of success for the B-52s getting out of country? He said about 20%. I mean, think about it. We had thermal shields that we closed on the B-52 when we went low level. Thermal shields.
What's
to
a
protect,
thermal shield?
To protect our eyes from atomic bombs going off, the flashes. So that finally, occurred to me that to ask the question, what do you expect of us returning, maybe 20%? Because we had elaborate exit plans, after we dropped our bombs. Low level, you get close to the target, you pop up to 3,000 feet, set up to, drop your bombs, and then, of course, get out of Dodge, so to speak.
Because these were atomic bombs.
Oh, yes. That was the Strategic Air Command. That's Cold War stuff. And I hope in this recording, and whoever sees this, is not upset by that, but that's what we were doing. I don't know what the situation is today. I know we've got planes that are probably 24 hours a day or on some kind of an alert. I don't know what the situation is today, but I know what it was back then. And like I say, and then every year, we always had operational inspections, ORI, operational readiness inspections. A KC-135 or a C-135 would show up at the base, Plattsburgh Air Force Base, and it was a team of graders that flew in to test the base on your readiness. And we had to fly low-level routes. And that particular day when we took off, we lost a generator. You've got 4 generators. I think, as I recall, we had 4. Had 8 engines, I don't recall now. But losing one generator was, from a safety standpoint, enough to turn us around and land. That would have hurt the base's ability to pass the operational readiness inspection. The AC called us all up and said, look, we've still got 3 generators. The weather looks great. I say we press on. All of us said, you bet, let's go. So we hit the low-level route back out west someplace, did our electronic bombs, dropped our electronic bombs, came out of there, declared an emergency because we lost a generator, and landed at, what's the base in South Dakota? Ellsworth Air Force Base in South Dakota. Spent the night, got the generator fixed, went on back to Plattsburgh. So if you've ever seen B-52s down low level, when a lot of people have, all of a sudden this thing is flying over them, because they're out in the sticks someplace and they come over at 500 feet. Now, I guarantee you, if we were going to Russia or wherever, we'd have been lower than 500 feet. I'd have had that radar set for maybe 3 miles out in front of me. And if there's a 12,000 foot peak out there in front of me and I pick at those blips up 3 miles in front of it, I'm going to have to do this in a hurry to get over it. But I want to be low level so radars don't pick me up.
Well, I would assume the Russians were doing the same thing, wouldn't you?
Oh, yeah. I'm sure. Yeah. That's part of the Cold War history of this country. But after Vietnam, I decided to get out, went to work for TVA. Tennessee is beautiful, green. You go over a hill and it's nothing but trees. It's green. My folks came one wintertime from the farm. My dad at the dining room table with Glenda and her family said, I don't understand how you can stand to live in this place. I said, Dad, what are you talking about? Well, I'm from Wyoming, of course. You can see 80 miles or 100 miles. I just had to get back out west after 10 years in Tennessee.
So I have a question about religion.
Yes.
One of the things that and Peggy, I don't know if it's true today or not, but it was which church you belong to was really important socially. And I don't mean socially like higher status or lower status or that. I mean that the goal for the parents and grandparents, I think, was that you would meet and fall in love with and hang out with kids from your church. And there was emphasis on that. All of the churches had youth groups. Nothing happened on Wednesday night except that was church night for your youth groups. Lane Bailey talks about she was crazy about she and Paul Engelman really liked each other. Her parents threw a fit. He was Catholic. She was absolutely not to go out with him. That there were. Do you have memories of that? Because Lane and I talk about that. Peggy, do you have memories of that? And is it still like that?
I don't think it is now. But we went to the Methodist church. That's where I was raised. And Wednesday nights those were church nights. You didn't have homework on Wednesday nights.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the Methodist church at that time was probably the biggie in town.
Yeah.
Reg Goff
Right.
was the
Yeah.
pastor.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. And the church you were talking about when Zion started, Dave, was on the corner of Grace and 7th, I believe.
That's right. Yes, Grace, I remember
Had it
that.
cornered from Dr. Birkenkamp's house.
Yes, exactly. Right.
Was Dr.
Oh, I remember.
Dr. Birkenkamp the pastor for Zion?
Yes. Yep. Yeah, I forget. Oh man, it almost brings back some other names that were after him, maybe, or before. I don't
Pastor
remember.
DeWay was there when Bill DeWay was there when
Yes.
we went there.
Oh,
And then
my.
while we lived in Douglas, they built the new church on Circle Road. That's where we
Right.
go now.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah, those were you remember that upbringing
Yeah.
in the church. Yeah, it's important what your parents, what they set up for you, what they, like my dad, out there on the farm, speaking to God, just out there. That meant more to me than probably a lot of sermons that I heard, probably.
Oh, yeah.
Because he was living it, he was living it. His
That's right.
religion.
Well, and my dad was brought up Unitarian. So, and we belong to a correspondence church.
Oh,
For people who were like us, that were Unitarians that lived in 500 miles from the nearest Unitarian church.
sure,
Really?
sure. You betcha. But there's another, growing up on the farm. You remember who was our classmate, Bowl? What was her
Kathy.
first name?
Kathy Bowles?
Yes. Kathy Bowl. Bowles, or was it Bowl or Bowles?
Bowles,
Bull.
I think, wasn't it?
And she-
What was it?
BOHL,
Okay.
Okay, and
Yeah.
then she had an older sister,
Audrey.
Audrey. They lived down about a mile from us on our farm. Okay.
Yep.
Now, on the farm, we always had hired men, and we always had a sheep herder every fall. Run the sheep out there, to get what they could. We had to be careful about, of course, the beets that were still left, the chunks of beet, we couldn't let them eat that. So we had a sheep herder. And my brother and I, Alan, we were just enthralled with the sheep wagons.
Yeah.
Oh, you could just live in this thing. You had everything, your bed and a stove, what have you. Well, this one sheep herder taught us how to make bows. Oh, we soaked it in some kind of linwood oil. I forget exactly. He showed us how to make some arrows. And of course, we had the shop, with everything. So we each had a bow. We called up the bows, Kathy and Audrey. I guess this is the next summer, maybe. So I called this the bows and a tryst. We called them up and said, come on over. We just want to meet you. It's you didn't do that very often on the farm because you're always so busy. Well, we ambushed them. When they got close to where you walk in to go into where our house was, on the main road, there was a big cottonwood tree. And as they got close, we shot 2 arrows into the cottonwood tree. Needless to say, that ended the tryst right there.
Yeah.
They went back home. We had another, we had another hired man that taught my brother Alan and I how to throw a curveball. This started probably right around high school time. And, the rest of the story, the baseball and what have you. But at one time after we were in Junior Legion, my dad built a pitcher's mound out on the farm and we had a backstop. So, Ellen and I, we practiced. So there's things we learned on the farm other than just, hard work and farming and what have you. We milked cows and I had to carry the skim milk and a slop bucket, if I can call it that, if that's appropriate today, opposite where our milk barn was, past the house, over to where a stream was, where we had the hogs. And to this day, no doctor has ever told me this, but my right arm is about an inch longer than my left. I'm right-handed. There's nobody can convince me that carrying those heavy pails at that age, 15, 13, and
Yeah.
my right hip is compressed. So my right side is compressed with my right arm longer than the left. I just know that's what happened because we carried those pails all the time over to the hogs.
Sure.
And pitching, when you get up on the mound, and I used to just push very hard off the mound with my right leg. That compresses that right side. And that hip talks to me today. They harvested beets with a horse and a plow, digging out 1 row of beets, and then using a beet knife, which had a tooth on it, picking up the beets, chopping off the leaves, and then throwing it into a wagon pulled by a horse. They did that for years. And then technology, we come up with a machine that can cut off the leaves and pull out 1 row of beets. And it goes into a bin. And at the end of the row, we'd empty that bin into a truck. That 1 row went to 3 rows. That 3 row went to 6 row. A 6 row topper that tops off the leaves and they're heavy on the beet. And exposes the beets. Now we come through with a 6 row puller. That's I think it's 6 row now. And
my granddaughter's married to Steve Snyder and they have a 12 digger.
A 12?
A 12 row digger.
I'd like to see the size of that tractor to be able
I
to
rode
pull.
in it with Steve one day. It was fun. Yeah, I'm sure it's 12 rows.
Pulling 12 rows, and of course, obviously, you don't have a bin big enough to put those beets in there. You've got to roll the beets out into a truck
Oh,
that's
yeah,
running right beside, to catch all those
Yeah.
beets.
I drove a beet
12.
truck one year.
Yeah, Paul Scheuerman, I've been out on during
Yeah.
beet harvest. Dan drives truck for him, and then I got up into the tractor with Paul, and they used GPS to
Yeah.
plant the beets, and those rows are as straight as a string. I remember planting beets. I mean, you really had to pay attention to what you were doing. Now they use UPS or GPS. And
Right.
now he's inside and we're pulling those 6 rows of beets and he's sitting there just watching the screen, just hanging on. I mean, he's not even driving. He doesn't have to drive until he gets it into the rows.
Are there any things that you wish that now that you wish we could have had or we would have known about back then?
Somehow, and you remember I was the student body president, and you're always talking to kids about what they would like. Oh, a candy machine. Why not some of our smart folks helping out some of those in our class that really need the help? You talked about geometry. Mr. Kenlon came home and told your folks that you're hurting. You don't know this stuff, so we need the help. What about other kids? That would have been something as a student body president, you kind of had that got involved, different people to help out. Those in our class, if they would admit it, that, needed some help with geometry. So, in that aspect, and I was thinking about college guys in sports, they got tutors all the time, well, why can't a normal student in a classroom in high school have that kind of ability? I don't even know if the high schools have somebody like that you can go to on any subject. Why not a student? It takes time. Can you imagine being helped by Rick Hake? Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. I think he would have had the ability to visually talk to you about physics.
Dave, this has just been great. Thank you so much for agreeing to be interviewed for the Washakie Museum.
It's been fun. It really has. And I know I jumped around, thinking about different things that wasn't probably.
But we all do.
Yeah.
We all do.
Okay.
Yep.
Well.
Thank you.
Good to see you guys. Thanks for
Bye-bye.
the invite.
Same here.
Thanks, Peggy.